Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Baxter, and today we're going to look at a different way of interpreting data. And in particular, this new way is through a frequency table and a dot plot. Okay, so we are not going to cover histograms today. We're just going to cover these two items on this page. We'll get to histograms later. So I want to give you an opportunity to look at this, evaluate it, examine it, and then practice it through the homework. All right, so the very first thing we want to look at is the data set for the frequency table. So when you're looking here at the very top, it says the data shows the number of goals by freshmen during by the soccer team last year, okay, by the freshman soccer team last year. All right, so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, what do these numbers mean, right? Says it's a data set, but the data set is actually the number of goals. Okay. And each one of these numbers represents a game. So if we were to add them up, I said in the first game they scored 6 points, second game third game 6, and so on, okay? So for the total number of games, I'm looking at, let's see, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. They had a total, if you want to write here, total 20 games, okay? And I'll show you why that might be important so you can double check yourself later. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different numbers. Now, what we want to do sometimes is we want to organize this data so that it makes sense, okay? So we want to know how many times, how many games they scored certain number of goals. So when we look at this frequency table right here, I'm gonna go here. I want you to notice there's a left side, there's a right side, right? On this left side, the number of goals, okay? We're gonna look at the range of this data set right here. So I want you to write like this, something like this. This is the range for the data. Okay, so that's gonna help you figure out what to put in on that left-hand side in a table, all right? So our ranges, we're looking at this, our data goes from 0, right here, all the way to 7, right here, okay? So we're going from 0 to 7 on this frequency table. Now, the frequency on the right-hand side is how often the data occurs. So kind of like when you're looking for mode, right? I'm trying to find out who's got the most. So looking at this, what would the mode be? Well, if you're looking for 1, 2, let's see, hold on. I was using the wrong thing. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, which matches up with our frequency table right here. It has the most, so 3 would be our mode right here, right? But frequency is, now we're breaking down the data and we're saying that we have more than one of every data point, okay? So, for example, if we're looking at this in the frequency piece of it, we're gonna look and we write down 0 and we say, oh, how many times does this occur? What is the frequency? Well, I see it 1 time in the data, so I'm gonna write 1. All right, next number. How many times did the freshmen score 1 goal at a game? All right, let me look at my data set. 1, 2, 3. Yep, they wrote down 3 for the frequency table. And you're gonna keep going all the way down. So like, for example, let's look at number 6. How many times did freshmen score 6 points in a game? 1, 2, 3. So they wrote down 3. Okay, so as we're looking at the frequency table, once you filled this out to tell us how often the data occurs, let's look at what this part right here says. It says, the frequency table organizes the data by telling us how many times each data point appears. So in this example here, how many games did the soccer team score 6 goals? I'll give you a second. Well, let's look at the number of goals right here. We're looking for how many games did soccer team score 6 goals. You're gonna look at the frequency and you should say 3. Okay, so if I go like this, it's going to say 6 goals, frequency, 3 times. Okay, it happened 3 times. All right, now let's look at what was the most common number of goals, or the mode, scored. Okay, so we know, based on what we talked about earlier, that the mode was 4. There are 4 3s in the data set. The most common number of goals, it's asking for goals, was 3. Okay, so when you get a question like this, make sure that you are being very careful about looking at what the question is asking for. It's asking for the number of goals, okay? It's not asking for the frequency, so you would not put a 4 there, right? You would be putting the number of goals as 3 is the most often times that it happened. Okay, let's switch over to dot plot a little bit. You're going to need to use the same data here, all right? So when you're looking at this data, and actually you can use your frequency table to help you with your dot plot, you're going to notice we actually create dots, okay? So this should look familiar. You've done this before. The dot plot is very similar to the frequency table, but instead of using numbers to show frequency, we're using dots, okay? So in this example, remember how 0, the times that the freshman scored no points in a game, was 1 time. Let's go back up to our data. See, they scored 1 time. Our frequency table says 1 time. So this number of goals scored, I want you to notice, this is our x-axis right here. So you can write x, okay? This is what we're gonna do, our x-axis, okay? It is not the frequency. Your dots are the frequency on the table, okay? So make sure you're noticing that 0 through 7 is our range, and then the dots are how often those numbers occur within that range, okay? So each dot represents a data point. Now looking at this dot plot, what was the least common number of goals scored? All right, well, if I look at this, I'm saying I'm gonna look at these heights right here, least number of times. When I look at this, I'm seeing this right here, 0 times that they scored 0 points, 1 time they scored 0 points, and 1 time they scored 7 points. So your answer to this is actually going to be 0 and 7 were both scored only once, okay? They had 1 dot each. So you can definitely have 2 different answers based on the kind of question that's asking, okay? Take your time on this. I'm gonna show you really quickly the homework. So let's see, I thought it was attached. Here it is. Okay, so when you get your homework, it's going to look like this. It's going to give you the scores, okay? And what you're going to need to do is just make a dot plot. We're not going to be making a frequency table right now. We can practice that another day, just practicing dot plots. Okay, so let's look at this example. The first example is that Juan is collecting fish in traps for an experiment. The table below shows the number of fish caught in the traps. Make a dot plot to show the results. All right, so very first thing you're going to do, 1, find the range, okay? So when you find the range, I'm gonna look at my smallest number. I have a 4 here. And then I'm gonna look at my largest number. I have a 10 here. So you'll notice my dot plot, and you don't need to have this part of it right here. Just as long as you have this, you're good to go. All right, and then you're gonna go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Create little spaces for yourself. Then you're gonna go in and say, okay, I have 1, 4. I made an X here, okay? Here, and I'll just do this in a different pen. You can kind of go, I have 1, 4, okay? And so then you're gonna make your X. And then I have a 5, make an X. I have another 5, make an X. Or a dot, make another 5, an X. Okay, so as you put them in your dot plot, here's another 6. You can even do this. This would be appropriate too, okay? Make your dots. 7. Got 1 here. I have a 7, 1 here, 7, 1 here. The other, then I've got an 8, 1 here, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10. Now, what I want you to make sure you try to do is try to keep your data. Here's your 1s. Here's your 2s. Try to keep them even. Here's your 3s. Here would be your 4, okay? Because sometimes what I see happening when people make their dot plots is they're doing something like this, where they have this, 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 and then all of a sudden they have this. See how they're spaced out? I have 4 in one, but I have 4 in the other one. That doesn't make sense. Try to make them line up with one another. Even if they're spaced out a little bit more, that's totally fine, okay? So just an example. So go ahead and try number 2, 3, 4, and try to create a dot plot. Now remember, make your number line and then find your range so that you know what to put right here, okay? All right, once you finish this, go ahead and turn this in. We'll see how far we get, and then after this, we'll do Alex.